even said anything.
I'll give you the 5-minute introduction.
Let us pray.
Okay, let me.
Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning. Wonderful to see all of you. This morning we have the great privilege of being able to listen to and engage with Pastor Andre Alexander. And I have asked Alan Ivy if he would take just a moment and introduce Pastor Andre to you.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I had the pleasure of first meeting Pastor Andre through my work. One of the things that I'm responsible for at our bank is oversight of our community and engaged in community affairs in St. Louis. And I had seen an article about the Tabernacle in the Post several years ago, and I asked one of my associates if we could get a meeting with Pastor Andre. And that kind of set us down a path, and this man is just a light, and he is such a good guy. We quickly became friends, and our relationship has grown significantly over the last several years. I just want to say that there are a lot of really fine nonprofit community development corporations in the St. Louis area, and they're all doing great work. But Pastor Andre's style through the Tabernacle is different. I would say it is faith-based entrepreneurial community development, and it's really impressive what he's been able to accomplish in the area of the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood. So he's going to tell us more about it this morning, and let me introduce you now to my friend, Pastor Andre Alexander.
No, that's okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So, thank you, Alan. I need to take you with me on the road when I have to go do these presentations. Thank you all for giving some of your morning. I get to wear two hats. I wear a hat as our pastor of our church, and I also get to wear the hat of president of our nonprofit. Both bring me great joy because this is near and dear to my heart. I believe God is at the center of every community and every family, and that is kind of our approach to engaging the neighborhood around our church. Now, I will tell you, a lot of the work that we do for me is also personal because where our church sits and the work that in the area we work in is where my family roots are. When my dad moved here with my grandmother, his mom and family from the South, they settled in this area, and it's also where my mom lived growing up as well, is where my parents met and started dating. So without this neighborhood, there's no me. So this is very, very personal. So this is our mission. That's our official mission statement. I say it this way: we are in the business of people. We believe everyone is an image bearer of God and should be treated with dignity and respect, and that should be reflected in the places that they live. And when you talk North City, oftentimes we're talking about a space that in the past has been disinvested in. And so like anything, when you've not invested in it for quite some time, you have the domino effect of other pieces, whether it's jobs, education, housing, crime. You have all those things that come into play as a result of disinvestment. And we believe we're called to help be a change agent of that by investing in the social, economic, and educational infrastructure to help bring about self-sufficiency. We want to be people in a church that gives hands up, not hands out. So little bit about our impact of who we are. And as of, call it a week ago, some of this has changed. So we, for instance, we bought another property. So now we own 46 properties. We serve 35 families. We actually now have boosted our total to 103 construction jobs by bringing on another construction team. I'll get into that stuff in a little bit. We've finished another home to begin to move families into. And I'll also talk about the hub, which is our community resource center. So if you will, this is a little bit of our impact / scorecard. So this is our history. So our church started in 2012, and we quickly recognized certain things, but we wanted to be good neighbors. And so we began to talk to residents about, what do you think are the needs? What are the most prominent issues and challenges? And as those things began to roll out, it was centered around housing, neighborhood, what I call amenities, meaning things that sometimes that we take for granted that may be in our communities that are not in the community where our church is. And so we began to generate a list based off of that. And then by God's providence, some of the people that we began to engage that way just began to start walking to our church. And at that time, we didn't own a physical building when we first started our church. We were leasing space in another nonprofit called Urban K Life that works with teens in St. Louis City high schools. And so as we're generating this list, we knew quickly we needed a way to engage in ministry that it could not be connected directly within our church, because certain entities, if they wanted to partner and or offer resources, that get sticky to hold church, separation of church and state, even though I don't believe we're ever really separate, but that's another conversation. So we founded Tabernacle Community Development Corporation, or as we call it, TCDC, in 2014. The greatest thing that really made this go, quick story, one day I'm at our church building that we finally bought in the neighborhood, and we were in the middle of renovating it. And I went in to set some stuff down, and I sat down my key to the front door, and I walked out and the door was locked. So I was locked out of church before the pandemic came. And people were out on their porches, and some people I knew and some people I didn't. So it's like 10 o'clock in the day. It's a nice summer day, and they're looking at me and I'm looking at them, and I have no keys. So I said, I guess I've got time. So I just went porch to porch and started really talking to people and learning and grasping and building relationships at a deeper level. That went on for about 2.5 hours because our facilities guy was across town doing something else, and he was the only person at that time that had a key. So I had to wait on him, but it was the greatest wait of my life because it really helped shape a lot of this stuff. So we're founded on these 3 E's: education, empowerment, and economics. What you don't know does work against you. If you don't have the basic essentials of life, it's hard to feel like you can be connected in life and have hope. And then economics. How do you handle when your financial scenario begins to change? So this is part of our team here. See, we intentionally have a small board and advisory board. It allows us to make decisions a lot faster. It allows us to be more nimble. It allows us to also be able to pivot when we need to. I've been a part of some organizations. I love them, but sometimes the board is like twice as much as the staff, and you need a person to manage the board so you can get stuff done. And we're in an environment where sometimes making a decision could be life or death for somebody, or housed versus unhoused. So we need to be able to move swiftly. So our official vision statement is assisting communities by building people. It's connected to our church. Our church motto is building communities by building people. So this organization comes alongside of the church. So a lot of people who attend our church volunteer, and or a couple of our staff members are actually members of our church. So sometimes when people come into our facility, they don't know it, but they're talking to Jesus people all the time. This is the area of focus for us. So roughly in the middle of this is Fairground Park. Quick thing on that, historically, in 1949, and the city of St. Louis at that time was still segregated. Many African Americans could not live in these neighborhoods. They were forced to live downtown. Fairground Park sits in the middle of our focus area. That park was segregated. And so it was a decision made that day, it had been going through legislation, and it went into effect in 1949 on a particular day to desegregate the park and the pool, because it was one of the few parks in the city that had a pool. And so, to give you a little more quick history about that park, it was also the home of one of the World's Fair. A lot of people don't know that. It was also the home of the St. Louis Zoo before you got the zoo here, where the zoo is today. So if you drive by it at the corner of Natural Bridge and Grand, you'll see this weird stone entrance. And most people go, why is that there? Because that was the original entrance to the zoo. Yes. So they desegregated. By 2 p.m., there was 2 groups of white mobs that approached the pool as African Americans were entering the pool to swim. By 3 o'clock, a fight broke out. By 6 o'clock that evening, the National Guard had to be called in because of a massive riot. And it ended on a street called Hebert Street, which is directly across. Some of you in this room have been to our church. It's directly across from my church. Is where this riot ended in 1949. And the mayor released a statement and said, maybe it's better we stay separate. So segregation went back into effect. So when my dad was a kid, he could not swim in that pool. He could not walk in that park. He could not do that until he was 19 years old in 1966 when they tried it again and desegregated it. I got a chance to meet and hear the story of a man who raised his family on Natural Bridge, was one of the first African Americans to move in a house across the street from that park. And he talked about the years him and his wife would sit on the porch and look at that park and could not go in it while they raised their children. So it's not that long ago. I tell you that story because it helps now set the tone for when we start talking about disinvestment and the challenges that are faced. It's because resources were intentionally locked out, especially as there was more migration west, and finally housing covenants were lifted and African Americans can move into the neighborhoods. Incidentally, we have purchased a property, a house before, and looked at the original housing deed that came with it, and it still had the restricted language in there that said no blacks can live in this house. A lot of that has not been updated. Now, nobody's enforcing it, of course, but if someone really wanted to, it could get really ugly because it's still in the deed. So these are our neighborhoods of focus. This represents roughly, as you'll see, it's kind of hard on here, that represents roughly a little bit over 13,000 residents. You see the city overall only has 310,000 residents compared to our metropolitan area of 2.8 million. But here's what I really want to show you. These are the challenges that we are working through. As you see, the metropolitan area poverty rate is 11%, and our area of focus is 37%. No school diploma, 6%. Metro, 20% in our area. Receiving governmental assistance, 11 overall, 41% in our area. Here's what I really want you to hold on to. 39% without transportation. No car. So in the community development space, you'll hear things like this. We want to develop a 15-minute community where a person can commute and get all the goods and services that they need, whether it's, laundry, healthcare, schooling, etc. We have adopted a model internally that says we really need a 5-minute community because transportation is limited. And so if you don't have those things close, then it's hard to get to them. And the challenge is, I get it, developers do things to make money. We're not against that. But the challenge is you need extra investment with slower return. So you get into some of the programming we do. This house, by the way, on this picture, I love it when we finished it because this house was built in 1897. And it still had the original crown molding, which is like 10 inches wide. Beautiful wood. And the story is the young lady we bought it from, her grandparents owned the house. She grew up in it, and it needed work. And she said, it's beyond me, but I know they would want to see it go somewhere where it can help people. And so we worked out an agreement and purchased it. But all the wood in the house was done on site. So not stuff you can go to Home Depot or Menards and get, but actually real wood carved out, real time there. So here's our areas of focus. What you'll notice about us, we focus on the things that we're good at, and we look to partner with others who do what we're not good at. St. Louis is great about operating in silos. We feel called to bring people together. And so that's what we try and do in every opportunity we get. So we don't too much venture outside of what you see on this screen. The Hub is a community resource center that opened up in December of last year. It is a former branch elementary school of the St. Louis public school system that closed in 1988. We purchased it from another church who owned it. It had been vacant for right at 21 years. No work had been done on it. The neighborhood was upset at the church because they let it become dilapidated. And so when we bought it, a couple of the doors due to a leak in the roof created moisture, and it sealed some of the doors. We had to cut them open. And once we got them open, water came running out because of the leak from the roof. $1.5 million investment that we turned 15,000 square feet into a 3,000 square foot auditorium where we host community events, and now where our church meets on Sundays and other select days. We also now have a clinic in there that is led and built out by Mercy. So we bring primary health care within walking distance. We have Maryville University speech therapy services there for 2 to 6 year olds for free under the Walker Scottish Rite Clinic that's in our space. We also have Pathways to Progress, which is offered through Catholic Charities that helps with family stabilization. So we create housing. I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. They come alongside of us and help those families create plans to lead them to thriving and being self-sufficient. So see how we partner? They don't want to build structures. We didn't want to add more staff. We come together. That way we both can do what we're good at. But their office is in our facility. We also have a law firm, Holland Law Firm, that offers free legal 2 days a week. No matter what the legal issue is, if it's out of their wheelhouse, they reach out to other attorneys to do it pro bono. One of the biggest challenges for a lot of people that we see is things like outstanding warrants or a non-show on a court appearance. And so they need good legal representation. The law firm helps with that. We also have now the Ashery Foundation, which is helping people get IDs and birth certificates, because if you're needing assistance in certain areas and you've been transient, meaning you've been homeless or near homelessness, you typically do not have these documents. I've lived in my house almost 20 years, and if it wasn't for my wife's organizational skills, I wouldn't know where my birth certificate is. So could you imagine if you're moving every 6 months to a year, you typically don't have that stuff. And so they help you navigate how to get it, as well as the supplemental costs, because each thing is like $20 to $25 per. So if you're on a fixed income and you've got 4 children and you need 4 birth certificates, $100 can be a whole lot. And so they help us with that. We also have Good Shepherd, which does pregnancy testing and helping young parents and families as well. Their office is there. And then the newest addition is we've partnered with First Bank and Prosperity Connection to have a micro branch so that we can teach financial literacy, help people open up accounts, because we have a lot of people who are going to places that are, in my opinion, very evil and wicked to cash checks and handle financial transactions because they charge them $15 to $20 per transaction. And in some cases, if it's a small loan, the interest rates are somewhere in the 30 to 40% range. None of us in this room would ever take out a loan at that level. So all of those services now exist in our Hub Community Resource Center. We call it the Hub. Think of a wheel. You have the hub of the wheel, and then the spokes come out that support the wheel. The different services support the community. The community is the hub itself. And it sits in the middle of all the residential stuff that we do. So it brought things within walking distance to people that once struggled to be able to connect with those resources. I was just sharing with Alan, now that we've filled this place up, we're scratching our heads going, okay, what happens now? So there's early conversations about a phase 2. And while our team is happy and board is happy, if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out, because I'm going, we just built this thing in the middle of the pandemic and wrestled with trying to find parts and wood and drywall, and now you want to build again. Okay, you lead it and let me take a vacation. But seriously, we will, because there are other partners that want to partner with us, and we need the space. Scholarship Search Initiative. We came, being a first-gen college student myself, one of the biggest challenges was what to expect when you go to school, how you're going to pay for it. My dad worked very hard. He drove a tractor trailer and forklift for a company for 43 years. It did not totally help pay for my college education. And so I know what it was like, and others of us did. So we created this initiative to start helping juniors and seniors in high school from the neighborhood and or very close by learn about the college experience. And then we pay them a stipend once a month on Saturdays to come in and do training in skills like interviewing, admin, communication, presentation of speech, and then they spend time doing scholarship searches. They get paid to find money to help them take what we call their next step. So whether that's a college degree, whether that's a community college 2-year degree, whether that's a tech school, whatever it is, whatever the next step looks like for you, we want to help you get prepared for it, and we want to help you find ways to pay for it. And so that's what that is. ARP, that's the signature thing we first did, because the number one thing the neighborhood told us was we need safe spaces, whether it's for sale or rental. We don't want slumlords. We want quality housing. And our neighborhood has a lot of vacancy, whether it's lots and or homes. And I know you may see on the news, and some people will say, well, the best thing to do is just demo them down. Here's the problem with that. In our zip code 63107, you have two things that are major. One of them being, we are the second highest infant mortality rate in the city of St. Louis. A lot of people don't know that. Certain third world countries have better survival of their children being born than some of the residents in our neighborhood where we live in St. Louis. The second thing is we also have the second poorest air quality, because in the past, you used to have large manufacturing before you have regulations. And then when they left a lot of stuff in the soil that they were not responsible for clearing up. And up until the mid-2000s, the city of St. Louis did not have a plan to say it's the standard, rather, of how you demo property. So you would see properties getting knocked down and all the asbestos and stuff that was in those homes, because the old floor tile and plaster had asbestos in it, was flying in the air. So if it goes up, guess what? It comes back down, and it comes back down on people's homes, yards, kids play. They're swallowing it, they're breathing it in. So we have taken the approach that is better to see if we can redeem those beautiful homes with some TLC and create living spaces to move families in, and then surround them with resources and hold them accountable in terms of being able to grow and blossom, rather than just demo them down. Now, from a mathematical standpoint, developers, I've had two of them look at me and shake their head. Pastor Andre, we just don't get it. We don't know why you do it. And I said, because Jesus said do it. And so they ponder at it, but then they go, wow, this is starting to work, because we've discovered data-wise. So my former life, I have an electrical engineering degree, minor in math, and an MBA. So I drive people up a wall because I think strategically and I dream. So I see big stuff, and then I want to work through details, and they're like, look, pick one. Either work through the details or dream. Don't do both. And I say, I'm wired that way. God sent me that way from heaven. I'm sorry. It is what it is. Data says it takes us about 3 to 5 years to see a family get into a position of stableness. And stableness means whatever bills I have, I can pay them. If I had outstanding debts, I've been able to either eliminate them or reduce them. And I'm at a place where I can take a next step, which may be market rate rental, because everybody doesn't want to buy a house, or it may be home ownership, or it may be, you know what, I want to change my profession, or I want to grow, and I want to go back to school in some capacity. We've had families buy homes. We've sent a young lady back to school who's now a nurse. She got a bachelor's degree. But it takes about 3 to 5 years. to start getting families to that place. This housing program allows us to do that in safe, quality housing. This is how we create construction jobs, because we hire a lot of people with skills within the neighborhood and or business owners who once lived in the neighborhood or have a connection. So, for example, the plumbing contractor we use, the electrical contractor we use, and the mechanical contractor we use, all are folks who own businesses that grew up in the neighborhood where we work. And that is how we're able to have the high minority participation rate that we do have. We go into a home, we change out everything. We get rid of the lead, we get rid of the asbestos, we put in new windows, we put in high efficiency things to make utilities low, and it creates jobs. And so we've been able to keep some construction crews working 5-6 years, which is unheard of in the construction industry, because a lot of times there's ebbs and flows and dips. By God's grace, when it seems like, okay, we're going to have to slow down, somebody generously kicks in and we're able to keep going. Valuable scholarship. That's really tied to this SSI initiative. We do 2 scholarships a year where we say we don't necessarily want the A student. We want that student who people are overlooking, but who can make it. Because a lot of us came from that kind of background. And then the village is our latest endeavor. We just launched officially to the public. It's been in the making for the last year. There's a copy of it that will be here for you all to be able to look at. But it's a plan that looks at development. There it is. See that pretty picture? It's looking at those neighborhoods of focus that I just talked about, and it lays out how we move forward doing more housing, more spaces for small business, more for sale, family development in that neighborhood space. It calls out over right at 21 projects total that look at covering the area doing this work for the next 15 to 20 years. And so now that it's out in the public, we had this team meeting with different developers, bankers, et cetera, to talk about, and philanthropy, to talk about how you fund it, how we do it. And so now that that's in motion, that's like our next kind of biggest endeavor. And our church sits in the middle of all of it. So at the same time, we're prepping, going, what will our neighborhood look like in 5 years, in 10 years? And how do we meet people where they are? And how do we connect with them? And we have found that it's really through being alongside of them when life happens. And so we're looking to hire more people to help us pull off this plan and engage it. So that's just a front picture of the hub. For the most part, it actually looks like that minus the banners. Talks about some of the programs and benefits that I went through. Those are some of our previous cohort of students from the Scholarship Search Initiative. Program goals. As you see, it covers everything from revitalizing community and making safe space to creating stakeholders, not just residents. One of our scholarship recipients. The village. You can see the nice logo we created. That is an actual picture of the street of our neighborhood. The hub actually sits in the middle of this particular street. This is Urban K-Life's building. That's where our church first began to meet. We actually owned that house on the corner. It was in too bad a shape, so we did have to demo it. But that walks through this, so I'm trying to get to here. I just want to stop here, because that gets into our plan goals. So I want to pause. I know I've just hit you with a whole lot, and ask if there are any questions. Yes?
I'm wondering if you partner any with the urban league.
Great question. So we have had discussions, me and Mike. The challenge between us and Urban League is they do, I think now on paper, they have a total of 55 programs. And we're trying to figure out which program would match what we already have. Because some of the things that they do would be an overlap, so it doesn't make sense. But it's trying to figure out which program matters. I can tell you this, We indirectly have been working with them for quite some time because under Pathways to Progress through Catholic Charities, the jobs development portion of what they do, they work with the Urban League. So it's a matter of figuring out. I call Mike an octopus because they've got their hands like everywhere. And he says, I know, Pastor, we're going to figure this out. So my hope is with them to look more so at the job development side of things, because that's one of the pieces that we do not currently have in our space. Good question. Yes.
Well, what's your selection process? I imagine there's lots of families who like a home, but, you're developing these homes, in the rental properties, how do you identify the families to move into those spaces?
Great question. So I don't. There is a panel that they meet and interview with, and that panel determines if it's a good fit or not. Because you're right. I mean, we've got a waiting list that's a mile long. As you know, we've done a report card about affordable housing in St. Louis. We got an F. It was nothing new. We already knew that. But that panel then determines. So it's not in my hands to determine. So that way, because here's what happens. Some of these people literally live in the neighborhood and they see me walking around. If I'm the one making that decision and they go, the pastor said I can't have housing, which is not true. So they handle all of those pieces.
What's the population of the area?
Right around 13,000 residents in the space that we operate in.
So with this plan for the village, which I can imagine you have scaled out in a sustainable way, what levels of funding are you looking for?
So, great question. Because the total price tag over 20 years is right at $438 million. Yeah, that's what it takes. And it's broken out into buckets. So we have, like right now, for instance, the state of Missouri has the Community Revitalization Grant out, $100 million grant. We're applying for that. So there's certain funding pockets we're looking at through a state organization called Missouri Housing Development Council, MHDC, that we're applying for this. There's also things at the St. Louis City local level of ARPA funds that we're applying for this. There's also two in particular, I call them funds. One of them is called Cornerstone Fund. They are connected to the UCC, and they do funding for projects like this, both philanthropy and equity. So there are a couple of funds out there like that we're going after. And then, as I mentioned in that kickoff meeting, we also had some of our key supporters in the room because there is a philanthropy component to this. And that philanthropy component we need to raise is roughly over the course of time about $10 million because you need unrestricted funding to do what's called pre-development, where you can go buy property, find out what's in the soil. If the soil is bad, get it out, prep for building. It also allows us to add a few more staff because my church loves me, my wife loves me, and they are determined that they will not let me burn out. So it helps with that. And it also will help with the applications and stuff for all these different grants. Because believe it or not, once you start getting to the state level and the federal level of applying for different grants for stuff like this, there's a significant cost to do it. And so that in itself sometimes can keep entities out because they don't have the funding to even apply. You need funding to apply for funding. So yeah, great one.
And thinking about, because I'm just trying to put this out there, thinking about what you would need of that 10 million as front-loaded, what does that look like, say, in the next 2 to 5 years?
Sure. That's roughly about a $3 million price tag because of securing real estate. So in this space, we have what's called from the city, we secured this 2 years ago, first land right of refusal development rights and tax abatement rights. Now, tax abatement is a huge issue, hot button in the city because if you give tax abatement, you're taking away dollars from education, which there's some truth to that. I won't dive down that hole, but there's also some myth to that. That's not entirely how that works. But long story short, as a result of that, we are trying to acquire as much property as now 6 years ago, when we first bought the first home and renovated it, we bought it from HUD. A grandmother had lost it, unfortunately, to HUD. We bought it for $16,000. We put 105 in it. We had it appraised, and in 2017, that house appraised for right at $50,000 after that type of investment. Today, that same house will appraise for about 120, so there's some climbing of value. But here's what's happening. We couldn't get anybody real estate-wise to even look in our area. Now, every day we're getting letters. We are interested in buying your property. We are interested in moving in your neighborhood. Why? Because from the front door of the hub, which is this little red square right here, is exactly 1 mile from the NGA. So now all of a sudden where we are is a hot spot. And you have vultures who want to swim in, buy it up, develop it, and then push people out. And so there are people in our neighborhood that we're determined, we've said, we're going to be your voice. We're not going to let that happen. There's a lady at the end of the block who's known me before I know myself. Her name is Miss Quinn. She's been there 65 years. I refuse to see anything happen to where she would lose her home. And so that front loading that you talked about helps us secure so we keep that kind of stuff at bay. I saw your hand.
I'm looking at your map, and I'm a sort of a visual person. So you've got your hub in the middle, and you are buying up individual houses, and then you are also going to build in the yellow strips the houses down below. Is that sort of what
Great question. Yes. So these darker yellow and orange strips is where we'll be building. This whole block now only has 4 functional houses, for example, on both sides of the block. This block only has 3 functional houses, and we own one of the 3 and the rest of the block that we've secured from the city. So where you see the yellow and orange is where we're looking to build. This space right here is the Boys and Girls Club. And on this corner, I don't know if you've heard any talk about PGA Reach and their partnership with the Boys and Girls Club of doing a training golf course for youth. That's where this is going. So that's another thing that's now making our area enticing, because that's like a $5 million investment coming. And the reality of it is, to sustain a golf course takes a lot of funding. So there are certain hours that the golf course will actually be open to the public, which a lot of people don't know yet. They haven't made that well known yet, but it will have to be to produce the residuals to be able to do the upkeep. So we know that public will not necessarily be the public that lives in the homes behind it today, because guess what? They can't afford a set of golf clubs. So, yeah, but great question. Yes?
Is your project, which is wonderful, enabled to reach out into the crime area and help bring these people into your project?
Say that again?
Maybe I haven't worded it right.
No, I couldn't hear you. You're okay. You probably worded it right.
How has your wonderful project affected the crime issue?
Crime issue.
Yes.
Great question. So some of the people we've hired are people who've been formerly in trouble with the law. I'll give you one quick example. There's a young man who lives diagonally across the street from my church. He lived with his grandmother. His dad and mom both in and out of prison. That's the life he knows. He was headed to jail. By the grace of God, got put on probation. And one of the houses we bought, we caught him outside in front of the house doing graffiti. We told him, Kevin, you got to get that up, because we're buying this house. He said, when you buy it, I'll clean it up. I said, okay, deal. We closed on the house 3 weeks later. I went and knocked on the door. Kevin, it's time for you to go to work. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, remember the deal we made? You said if we buy it, you clean. And he said, yeah. I said, we bought it. Here's the deed. Our facilities guy gave him what he needed. We put Kevin to work. 2 years later, Kevin now has 2 jobs in his own apartment. So there are a few stories we've had like that, but that's how we do it. The other piece of it is, when you take a vacant home or building away from being a spot open to trouble, it then deters crime. Now, the biggest challenge is this. We don't want to just herd crime to another neighborhood. Because typically what happens, we're good in St. Louis about herding people like cattle. So we'll do work here and then we'll just push trouble over there. But that's not helping. So it's through employment, It's through sending people back to school. And yes, sometimes, unfortunately, it is saying, okay, St. Louis PD, these individuals do not want to change. They do not want to act right, and they should be prosecuted. So it's all of the above. That doesn't make me a popular guy in my neighborhood when I say the third one. Because it's, how could you say that? You want to send people to prison? No, that's not what I want to do. I want to employ them. I want to help them get housed. And I also understand sometimes some individuals need a different rock bottom first before they'll hear what we're trying to do. So, great question. Jimmy.
I haven't looked at your plan, but does your plan include the old school in there, just right up the street from the church?
It does, as you know, working with St. Louis School Board can, again, another hot button, right? Because here's what the covenants have in deeds for St. Louis Public Schools, is that if you buy a school, that it cannot become a school. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. Yeah, they have that deeded in there. That was done long ago. Here's why. Think about it. If you're intentionally, which if you've ever heard of Team 4 report, if not, Google it. It will blow your mind away how the city made a decision back in the late 60s to not invest in our area and put their resources in South City so that it would go down far enough that people would want to leave it and then come back and buy it cheap and develop it for people who would want to move in. You've heard the name Paul McKee. Whether you like him or not, here's one thing he did. He did a study late 90s that said, where do people want to live in St. Louis? And the furthest in that data it said people want to go is about Wentzville. When you get to around Wentzville, people started to say, I really want to move back in the city with the beautiful architecture and brick. So that's why he started buying all the stuff he did, because the data told him that that day was going to come. We are now living in that day. So one way to make values go down is make an educational system go down. If schools begin to come vacant and no other school can become a school and you have no education and people are not learning, guess what happens? You dumb down the area and people either leave or those who stay don't have the education to understand what you're doing. So that was done intentionally. So now this new school board is working through changing that language so that folks like us could possibly buy buildings, change them into schools, and or we're toying around. This is a secret. If you tell it, I know it came from here. We're toying around with an idea of if you bought a school building and we recognize all the classrooms work better for learning. So what would it look like if you made each classroom 10 to 15 students and made little pods of schools of only up to maybe 100, 120 students in one part of a building, and then you take the other part and create the housing. So that way now that kiddo doesn't have to worry about a bus. They can just walk right out of their house to school. And if their parents need to meet with a teacher, guess what? Mom or dad doesn't have to worry about catching a bus or even if they get off work late because the teacher and the house is already in the same place. They go to aftercare, I talk to the teacher, and then we go upstairs and go home. So we're toying with that idea of how you make that work, which will take us into a big hot button in terms of education. Because public versus private, public versus charter, who runs it, who manages it. That part is what we're still trying to figure out.
Where's the school on your map? Oh, wait.
That seems far, but from here to there is a 10-minute walk or a 60-second car ride. That's a 330,000 square foot building. It was built to hold 1,600 students, and it did in its heyday when my family went there. It now has about 100 students in it.
What's the name of the school?
Beaumont.
I sense there are probably more questions, but I did need him to preach another sermon. So, Andre, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We did not. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
You have 1 minute.
So, I guess in the early stages of the pandemic, we worked together and we connected, Father Joseph, who you all remember, with Pastor Andre, and we worked on a collaborative series of Zoom meetings with members of our church and members of the Tabernacle, really trying to address some very difficult conversations that between races and how we break down barriers and destroy the stereotypes that exist. And with Father Joseph's departure, we kind of got off track a little bit, but I think it's something we're interested in trying to maybe go to the next step. The other thing that you all should take pride in knowing that our church provided some bridge financing to the Tabernacle to allow them to finish the hub project and accelerated the completion of that project. So we have a budding relationship, and we look forward to building on that. That was a little over a minute, sorry.
Again, Andre, thank you so much for being here, and we'd love
Thank
to
you.
have you come back again and engage in more conversation with us.
I'm coming for the bacon. Oh.
Thank you all for being part of this. God bless you.
Thank you.